Every day, a toucan with a broken wing appears at a lady's window and moves everyone when they discover the reason. The sun peeked over the horizon, washing the sky in orange hues that reflected off the windows of the houses in Bloomfield. It was a quiet, small town where life seemed to flow at its own pace, far removed from the bustle of large cities. Along its tree-lined streets and single-story homes, neighbors knew one another by name and shared not just physical space but also their stories, sorrows, and joys. Amid this simplicity and warmth, a story emerged that would touch the hearts of everyone in town. Miss Claire, a 72-year-old lady with hair as silver as the moon and eyes that held the gentle light of someone who had witnessed countless sunrises, was known for her skillful hands that turned her modest backyard into a true paradise of color and fragrance. The stone walls of her yard, overgrown with moss, surrounded an impressive array of plants that bloomed at different times of year, ensuring there was always a spark of life and beauty in that sacred place. Ms. Claire's daily routine centered on her meticulous care of the plants. She would rise with the first rays of dawn, brew a strong, fragrant coffee that filled her home with a comforting aroma, and walk outside carrying an old metal watering can inherited from her grandmother. Humming tunes from days gone by, she watered each plant as if every note were a special gift for nature itself. Neighbors strolling by would slow their pace to admire her devotion, and often paused for a brief chat, usually ending with a smile and a small bouquet of flowers in hand. That morning, however, started differently. The sky, which the night before had been filled with heavy dark clouds, still seemed weighed down by the storm that had battered the town. The fierce winds and torrential rain left visible marks everywhere. Broken branches, flooded streets, missing shingles. Accustomed to facing hardships with the serenity of someone who understands life's cycles, Ms. Claire got up as usual to survey the damage in her precious garden. Walking among bent stems and petals strewn on the ground, she felt a twinge of sadness but was sure that, with time and care, everything would bloom again. That's when she noticed something unusual amidst the fallen leaves near the old magnolia tree. Standing tall in the corner of her yard, a toucan with vibrant plumage and a bright orange bill, stark against its black feathers, lying motionless on the damp grass. Ms. Claire's heart raced at the sight. She approached cautiously, fearing the bird might already be gone. When she was just a few steps away, the toucan opened its eyes, revealing a mix of fear and pain. It tried to flap, its wings but one hung at an odd angle, clearly broken. The bird's struggle moved Ms. Claire deeply, and without hesitation she decided to help. With gentle hands, she wrapped the toucan in a soft cloth she kept in her apron pocket and brought it inside. She improvised a little shelter using a box padded with soft towels, set out a shallow dish of fresh water, and offered slices of the fruit she grew in her backyard. At first wary, the bird slowly began to trust the gentle gestures and comforting voice of this kind old lady. In the days that followed, Ms. Claire dedicated herself entirely to caring for the toucan, whom she affectionately named Buddy. She consulted old books on wildlife care sitting in her dusty living room bookshelf, phoned her son, who lived in a bigger city, for internet research, and even reached out to a veterinarian from a neighboring town. She applied all the knowledge she gathered with the same devotion she gave her garden, adapting a special corner in her backyard so Buddy could recover in conditions as close as possible to his natural habitat. News of the rescued toucan spread quickly through Bloomfield. Children begged their parents to walk by Ms. Claire's house in hopes of catching a glimpse of the exotic bird. Adults stopped by to lend a hand, bringing fresh fruit or sharing tips on possible treatments for the broken wing. What began as one woman's kind gesture grew into a unifying force for the community. As the days passed, Buddy showed signs of improvement. He was eating more regularly and moving about with greater confidence. Though his broken wing prevented him from fully flying, he started exploring Ms. Claire's yard with increasing curiosity. Watching his progress filled her heart with profound joy, as if this little creature had brought new light to her serene days. Then, one especially bright morning about 3 weeks after the rescue, something extraordinary happened. Ms. Claire, still a bit groggy from sleep, was startled by a soft tapping sound at her bedroom window. Pulling back the lace curtains that filtered the early sunlight, she found Buddy perched on the outside windowsill, staring at her with shining eyes. First, she thought it might be a coincidence, but when the same scene played out the next morning, and the next, and continued day after day, she realized a new ritual had begun, an unspoken bond beyond words. Buddy's daily arrival at her window became the most anticipated moment of Ms. Claire's day. She woke up early, got herself ready as though expecting a very special visitor, and settled near the window with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. Right on cue, with the first rays of sunlight, Buddy would appear and linger for a few minutes, as if conveying a silent message, a reminder that life, even in its fragile states, forges on. Neighbors, curious about this new routine, started gathering quietly near Ms. Claire's front gate around Buddy's usual arrival time. They formed small groups on the sidewalk, talking in hushed tones so as not to scare him off, and watched with fascination as a seemingly ordinary moment took on deeper meaning. Over time, these impromptu gatherings evolved into a small social event where people who barely knew one another found themselves sharing personal stories, inspired by the bond between Miss Claire and Buddy. Among those who came by regularly was Adam, a young biology teacher from the local high school. His rumpled hair and thick-framed glasses spoke of his passion for books and knowledge. At first, Adam was driven by scientific curiosity, but soon he realized there was more to Buddy's story than an interesting biological phenomenon. He saw a powerful metaphor of resilience and adaptation, topics he often tried to impress upon his teens, who frequently felt discouraged by the trials of growing up. To everyone's surprise, Adam arranged a field trip with his 8th grade class to visit Ms. Claire and meet Buddy. She was at first shy about hosting so many people, but Adam's contagious enthusiasm convinced her. On the appointed day, she welcomed the students with homemade cookies and freshly squeezed juice from her backyard, while Adam conducted an outdoor lesson on the local fauna and the importance of conservation. At first, the students showed the usual lack of interest typical of their age, but they gradually became fascinated by the story of the toucan with the broken wing. They listened closely as Adam explained the bird's anatomy and the challenges it would face in the wild with a physical disability. When Buddy appeared, cautiously hopping around the yard, wing half extended, a reverent hush fell over the group. In the eyes of those young people more accustomed to phone and gaming screens than to the subtleties of the real world, shone a genuine curiosity, a sense of awe that no virtual experience could match. The next day, Adam was amazed at how many eager hands shot up in class. Normally indifferent students wanted to share their thoughts about what they had seen. They talked about how Buddy, despite his limitations, was finding ways to adapt and carry on. They compared this to their own struggles, whether academic, family-related, or typical teenage insecurities. The toucan with the broken wing had become more than just a biological example. It was now a source of inspiration for teens learning to navigate life's hurdles. Buoyed by his students' renewed interest, Adam developed a cross-disciplinary project addressing themes like perseverance, empathy, and environmental care, all anchored in Buddy's story. The project gained recognition at school, and before long, other classes wanted to visit Ms. Claire and meet the bird that was changing perspectives. Buddy's influence, however, was not confined to the classroom. Olivia, the only physician at the local clinic, also felt deeply moved by the toucan's resilience. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes from daily encounters with human suffering, Olivia grappled constantly with the challenge of maintaining hope among patients facing chronic illnesses and permanent disabilities. One particularly difficult afternoon, having informed a young patient that he would have to learn to live with limited mobility following an accident, Olivia sensed his despair. Searching for words of comfort that wouldn't sound trite, she thought of Buddy and his daily visits to Ms. Claire's window. She told the young man the toucan's story, how, despite being unable to fly as before, he discovered new ways to find meaning and beauty each new day. The patient was unexpectedly moved and asked if he could see the bird for himself. Recognizing the therapeutic potential of such an encounter, Olivia arranged a visit with Ms. Clare. The meeting took place on a golden autumn afternoon, with dry leaves dancing in the breeze through Ms. Clare's yard. Sitting in his newly acquired wheelchair, the young man quietly watched the toucan, who moved with a sort of graceful adaptation, using his strong beak to compensate for the injured wing. At that moment, something changed in the patient's expression. A faint spark of determination lit his eyes, almost imperceptible, but enough for Olivia to recognize the start of a process of acceptance and rebuilding. In the physical therapy sessions that followed, the young man often referenced Buddy as an example. If a toucan can adapt and find joy with a broken wing, I can learn to live fully with my limitations. Encouraged by this success, Olivia began incorporating Buddy's story into her approach with other patients. She started a small support group that met weekly to discuss challenges and breakthroughs, and she occasionally arranged visits to Ms. Clare's home. The yard that once served as Ms. Clare's private haven gradually became a place of recovery and renewal for people in various stages of physical and emotional healing. Yet the greatest change of all was happening quietly within Ms. Clare herself. Widowed for over a decade, she had grown used to solitude and found a steady rhythm in her predictable days. The arrival of Buddy, and by extension, all the people drawn in by his story, shined a fresh light on her life. She felt useful in a way she hadn't for so long, as if the universe had conspired to remind her she still had much to give the world. Mornings, once devoted solely to tending her plants, now had a deeper meaning thanks to Buddy's prompt appearance and the small gathering that formed outside her gate. Ms. Clare started brewing bigger pots of coffee, and on special days baked breads and cornbread, whose inviting aroma would drift through the neighborhood, drawing in even more visitors. What began as a single act of compassion toward an injured bird grew into a community movement centered on rediscovering essential values. One crisp morning, as fall began to cede to winter's chill, Ms. Clare received an unexpected guest. An elderly man, leaning on a carved wooden cane, joined the small group gathered on the sidewalk, introducing himself as Mr. Lawrence, a retired ornithologist. He said he had driven over 100 miles after hearing about the toucan with a broken wing that visited a local woman's window each morning. Ms. Clare welcomed him with her usual hospitality. She offered him the coziest armchair on her porch, a mug of hot coffee, and a generous slice of freshly baked cornbread. Mr. Lawrence, with eyes lit by a lifelong passion for birds, listened intently to the tale of Buddy's rescue and the daily routine that had since taken root. When Buddy finally appeared on the windowsill, the old ornithologist fell silent for several minutes, taking in every movement and subtlety of the bird's behavior. Tears brimmed in his weary eyes, though he made no effort to hide them. After Buddy flew off, as he always did, Mr. Lawrence explained to those gathered the significance of what they had seen, how toucans are social creatures that form strong bonds, display complex recognition and reciprocation behaviors, and how Buddy's daily presence at Ms. Clare's window was no random habit but a deliberate expression of gratitude and connection. Hearing this scientific perspective added another layer of meaning to Ms. Clare and Buddy's bond. What was already an emotional story gained an almost mystical resonance among the townspeople. Word of the toucan's morning visit spread beyond Bloomfield, drawing attention from local papers, radio stations, and eventually internet posts that carried the story far beyond the county lines. In just a few weeks, Bloomfield began seeing visitors from other towns and even different states. People with their own struggles, their own broken wings, felt drawn to a story that spoke of renewal and the will to overcome. Local guest houses, usually empty except during annual fairs, were suddenly booked to capacity. Small businesses saw a welcome uptick. A town that had long faced the problem of young people leaving for bigger cities found fresh economic and social life in the tale of Buddy. With the crowds growing each day, the town council stepped in to ensure that Ms. Clare's peace and Buddy's well-being were not jeopardized. They set specific visiting hours, scheduling volunteers to guide the groups. A portion of the new tourism revenue was channeled into creating a conservation fund to protect Bloomfield's green spaces and help rescue injured wildlife, a new initiative dubbed Project Buddy. This influx of tourists sparked important conversations. Some worried that too much attention might overwhelm Buddy or disrupt his natural behavior. Others wondered whether Ms. Claire could handle the constant stream of admirers at her age. The debates, held with the respect typical of a small community where everyone knows each other's name, resulted in balanced guidelines aiming to look out for everyone involved, including the toucan. One particularly moving scene occurred on a cold winter morning. The town shrouded in a light mist. A couple arrived with their young daughter, around 9, her hair a cascade of curls framing a solemn face. She used a prosthetic on her right leg, the outcome of an illness she had faced at an even younger age. Clearly exhausted, her parents had pinned their hopes on the toucan's story, helping their child come to terms with her new reality. Ms. Claire, so naturally attuned to others' emotions, recognized the sadness in the girl's eyes straight away. She approached quietly, making no mention of the prosthetic or the difficulties the child faced, and offered her wrinkled hand. "Would you like to meet my special friend?" she asked, using the same gentle tone she reserved for her garden's most delicate blooms. The girl hesitated but eventually took Ms. Claire's hand. They made their way to a wooden bench under the magnolia tree that afforded a perfect view of Buddy's window perch. As they waited, Ms. Claire chatted softly about the different plants, the various birds that visited the feeders, and the absence of rain that year. She spoke of everything except troubles and limitations. When Buddy finally appeared, hopping gently with his carefully balanced movements, the girl straightened on the bench, eyes suddenly alive with interest. She watched in silence as the bird used his beak to steady himself, making up for the injured wing. Then, quite unexpectedly, a smile lit her face, a genuine, radiant smile that brought tears to the eyes of her weary parents. "He's like me," she said simply. "Different, but not any less." Those few words of childlike wisdom left the nearby adults speechless. Ms. Claire, whose empathy was honed by many years of living, merely gave a gentle nod and squeezed the girl's hand. In that quiet moment, she understood with absolute clarity that Buddy had become more than just an injured bird. He was now a symbol, a catalyst for profound transformations that went far beyond Ms. Claire's original understanding. In the months that followed, Buddy's influence continued to ripple outward in ever-widening circles. Children's books were written, inspired by his journey. Local artists painted and sculpted him, depicting the morning visits that so captivated the town. A non-profit supporting people with disabilities adopted a stylized image of Buddy as their new logo, alongside the words, "Different, but not any less," echoing the girl's simple yet powerful phrase that had touched so many hearts. Miss Claire, in her quiet wisdom, watched these changes unfold with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Never could she have imagined that her instinctive act of saving a wounded bird would lead to such sweeping waves of positivity. On sleepless nights, as the wind rustled the magnolia leaves, she marveled at the mysteries of how small actions can produce such unforeseen consequences, and at the intricate web that connects every living being. Still, the town's new routine stayed the same. Every morning, Buddy showed up on Ms. Claire's windowsill, bringing his vibrant presence and an intense gaze that seemed to pierce appearances. Every morning, a small crowd gathered to witness that silent meeting between an elderly woman and a toucan, each marked by the passage of time and adversity. And every morning, something subtle yet transformative took place in the hearts of those who looked on. As the seasons rolled by, something unexpected began to happen. Buddy, whose movements had been limited by his broken wing, gradually showed an increasing range of motion. His recovery, slow and almost imperceptible day by day, became striking when observed over weeks and months. Though he still couldn't fly with total ease, he began reaching greater heights, gliding for longer distances, inching closer to the open skies that were his true realm. Mr. Lawrence, the retired ornithologist who had become a regular visitor, explained that Buddy's gradual improvement reflected nature's extraordinary adaptability. His bones had healed in a new configuration, his muscles had learned fresh ways to compensate, and his survival instincts had found alternative solutions. Buddy would never be exactly as he was before. The storm had left its mark on him, but He had found a new way to live, just as valid and just as beautiful. Miss Claire watched these developments with mixed emotions. She was genuinely overjoyed to see the bird she loved making progress, yet she also felt a quiet fear. If Buddy regained enough of his natural freedom, he might move on, perhaps returning to a distant habitat or ending the morning visits that had become the highlight of her life. She kept such worries to herself, understanding that true love means respecting the other's essence, even if it leads to parting ways. One especially memorable morning, as spring cloaked the garden in fresh blossoms and sweet fragrances, Buddy arrived at the window accompanied. At his side was a slightly smaller toucan, its plumage a bit less vivid than Buddy's. The two remained there for a few minutes, as though Buddy were introducing this newcomer to Ms. Claire. Perhaps a friend, perhaps something more. Mr. Lawrence, on hand that day, explained in hushed excitement that Buddy had likely found a mate, and that their joint appearance was a rare and meaningful behavior among toucans. It signaled trust, acceptance, even a willingness to include Ms. Claire in their circle of connection. It was a privilege few researchers had witnessed, an intimate glimpse into complex avian relationships. Word that Buddy had a companion spread quickly, prompting reactions throughout the town. Many saw it as a fresh, joyful chapter in the ongoing story of Bloomfield's toucan. Others worried this meant the morning visits were coming to an end. Ms. Claire, with her characteristic composure, simply smiled and waited, certain that life has its own flow, and that trying to control it is like attempting to hold water in your hands. Within a few days, the question was answered. Buddy continued perching at Ms. Claire's window each morning, sometimes alone, sometimes with his new partner. What had begun as a gesture of thanks for being saved now took on additional meaning. This was not merely returning a favor. It was an active choice to build bridges between worlds, proof that true connections can transcend boundaries that once appeared insurmountable. Approaching the first anniversary of Buddy's rescue, the town council decided to mark the occasion with a celebration, tying it to the annual spring festival, when the flowers were at their loveliest and the mild weather invited people outdoors. Local artisans crafted decorations inspired by the toucan, using recycled materials and traditional techniques passed down through generations. Students put on theatrical performances centered on Buddy's story, highlighting themes of empathy, determination, and mutual support. The clinic staffed booths offering advice on physical rehabilitation, explaining how to help those facing long-term disabilities. The centerpiece of the event would undoubtedly be Ms. Claire's home. Specifically, Buddy's daily appearance at the window. Worried that the crowds might stress the bird, organizers set up a rotation system so smaller groups could visit at scheduled times, maintaining a respectful distance. Ms. Claire initially balked at the scale of the event, but eventually agreed, once she was assured Buddy's well-being would be protected. On the morning of the festival, excitement buzzed through Bloomfield. What if Buddy decided not to show up on such a busy day? What if the unusual commotion frightened him away? Any such fears proved unfounded, however. Right on schedule, Buddy landed on the windowsill as he always did, this time with his mate. The two toucans stayed there longer than usual, as though sensing the significance of that special day for the gathered crowd. A reverent hush fell over the onlookers. People of all ages, some who had traveled great distances, all brimming with emotion as they witnessed this interspecies connection. When the pair finally took flight, the crowd broke into gentle applause, celebrating not just the birds but everything they had come to stand for: perseverance, adaptation, and the beauty that can emerge from life's imperfections. Festivities continued throughout the day, honoring not only Buddy and Ms. Claire but the collective transformation their intertwined stories had brought about. The once quiet town, known mainly for its small-scale farming and slower pace, now had a new identity. As a symbol of values that resonated deeply with so many, Bloomfield had become a destination for people in search of inspiration and renewed hope. When dusk finally fell, painting the sky in shades of purple, most visitors drifted home. Ms. Claire sat alone on the bench beneath her magnolia tree. She reflected on the unlikely path her life had taken. Who could have guessed that rescuing a hurt bird would transform not only her existence, but that of an entire community? How could a single act of compassion spark such sweeping changes? A soft breeze brushed her lined face, carrying the fragrance of the blossoms she had nurtured with so much love. In that quiet moment, away from admiring crowds and newfound notoriety, Ms. Claire let her mind revisit every chapter of her shared journey with Buddy. The fear she felt upon first finding him hurt, her uncertainty about caring for a wild bird, the nights she woke up worried about his survival. She remembered, too, the first time Buddy perched on her windowsill, and how that innocent moment had turned into a treasured daily ritual. She thought of all the people who had crossed her path in the months that followed. Adam and his curious students, Olivia and her patients seeking hope, Mr. Lawrence with his lifelong passion for birds, and the little girl with the prosthetic, whose words carried such tender wisdom. In her 72 years, Ms. Claire had experienced love and loss, sorrow and joy, hard work and quiet satisfaction in life's small victories. She had built a dignified and peaceful life, devoted to her garden and to memories of days gone by. Recognition or special attention had never crossed her mind. Yet there she sat, at the heart of a story that stirred something deep in so many people. Her musings were interrupted by a familiar sound, the soft flutter of wings in the deepening twilight. She glanced up to find two silhouettes perched on a low branch of the magnolia tree. Even in the growing dark, she recognized Buddy and his mate watching her with bright, inquisitive eyes, as though they too were pondering the strange twist of fate that had bound their lives together. "I see you two wanted a bit of peace after all that commotion," Ms. Claire murmured, smiling at the birds. She didn't expect an answer, of course, but their presence in that private moment of reflection felt meaningful, as if closing the circle that had begun when she rescued Buddy in the aftermath of the storm. In the months to come, Buddy's story continued to inspire transformations, some visible and measurable, others subtle and deeply personal. Project Buddy, originally a local wildlife rescue fund, expanded and gained regional recognition. Biologists and volunteer veterinarians joined forces to establish a small rehab center for injured wild creatures, providing specialized care for animals displaced or harmed by natural disasters and human encroachment. Under Adam's leadership, the school introduced an innovative curriculum that weaved lessons of empathy and resilience into its traditional framework. Students were encouraged to observe nature with keener eyes, to identify patterns of adaptation and perseverance, and to recognize that physical limitations do not define anyone's worth or potential. These classes nurtured a new generation of young people who were more compassionate, more attuned to the subtle beauty of the world, and more willing to see possibility where others saw only constraints. At the clinic, inspired by Ms. Claire's intuitive kindness, Olivia implemented animal-assisted therapy programs, creating spaces where patients could connect with creatures that, like them, faced physical hurdles. This contact provided comfort and hope, often reaching emotional depths untouched by words or medication. And all across Bloomfield, cultural and economic revitalization continued. Local craftspeople produced creations inspired by Buddy's story, blending traditional methods with sustainable materials. Small bed and breakfasts were updated to host the steady flow of visitors. Restaurants showcased local produce in their menus, celebrating the area's natural richness. The town, formerly overshadowed by the lure of bigger cities, now offered new possibilities and a collective sense of pride. As these community-wide changes took shape, individual stories of overcoming adversity also cropped up like seeds sprouting. After a nourishing rain, the young man in the wheelchair, motivated by Buddy's example, pursued a career as a Paralympic athlete, representing the region in national competitions. The little girl with the prosthetic leg, whose simple words had resonated so powerfully, blossomed into a talented artist, using her work to celebrate the beauty of diversity and determination. Miss Claire, who in her youth had once dreamed of teaching but never did, found herself fulfilling that role in her twilight years, though in an entirely unexpected way. She became a kind of community elder, a guardian of wisdom, sharing stories and insights with anyone seeking her perspective. Her backyard, especially the space beneath the old magnolia, became an informal classroom where profound lessons were conveyed through gentle words and compassionate deeds. As for Buddy, he continued his own path of healing and renewal. Over time, the partner he had introduced to Ms. Claire that spring morning revealed herself to be a female toucan. The two built a nest nearby, high enough for safety, but close enough to remain connected to the woman who had played such a crucial role in their lives. When their first chicks hatched, the entire town rejoiced as though welcoming new family members. Mr. Lawrence, tears in his eyes, explained the extraordinary meaning of it all. Buddy, an injured bird whose chances of survival and reproduction would have been slim in the wild, had not only lived, but thrived, found a mate, and fathered chicks. It was living proof of the adaptability found across all of nature, a testament that life finds a way where there seems to be none. That little family of toucans became part of Bloomfield's landscape. The chicks, eventually following Buddy and their mother, learned to show up on Ms. Claire's windowsill just as he had, practicing the same morning ritual that started with an act of gratitude and had expanded into a bridge between species. Locals saw it as a sign of continuity, an assurance that the remarkable story would keep touching hearts long after its original characters were gone. Thus, the once unremarkable town of Bloomfield secured a special place on the map and in the hearts of people far and wide, not for impressive landmarks or typical tourist attractions, but for the authenticity of a story that spoke directly to the most fundamental human experiences. The desire to overcome limitations, the need for genuine connection, and the ability to see beauty in even the most challenging circumstances. Over the years, certain details of Buddy's rescue inevitably evolved in the collective memory. Some retellings embellished the mystical aspect of Ms. Claire's bond with the bird, while others played up the sweeping social impact. Some versions spotlighted Buddy as a symbol of overcoming adversity, while others depicted Ms. Claire as the embodiment of selfless compassion. Yet all accounts preserved the core message that small gestures can have enormous ripples, that limitations do not define a being's worth, and that true bonds can emerge where least expected. For those who had witnessed the events firsthand, the memories remained vivid. They recalled Buddy's gleaming eyes each morning at the windowsill, Ms. Claire's contented smile as she welcomed him, the almost sacred hush that enveloped the onlookers. They remembered how their own lives had been touched and transformed, not by grand spectacles, but by the profound simplicity of a story of mutual care and resilient adaptation. In a world so often consumed by speed, noise, and the constant hunt for the next big thing, Buddy's story offered a needed counterpoint, a reminder that some of life's most meaningful experiences happen slowly, in quiet moments, through an attentive appreciation of everyday wonders. It also offered a renewed perspective on what constitutes strength and beauty, inviting a more compassionate view of our own and others' imperfections. Years later, when the first wave of visitors had long since returned, some multiple times, bringing along children and grandchildren, the heart of the story remained unchanged. Buddy's daily appearance at Ms. Claire's window continued to remind anyone watching that even with broken wings, there are still flights worth taking, and that although bodies may be limited, spirits can remain unbroken. It showed that genuine greatness often emerges in the simplest acts and in the most unexpected connections. And so, what started as a chance meeting between a lonely elderly woman and a wounded toucan became an enduring tale of the beauty that rises from imperfection, the strength discovered in fragility, and humanity's capacity to see worth in every form of life. A story that, like Buddy himself appearing faithfully each dawn, continues to remind all who witness it that even with broken wings, meaningful heights can be reached, that every being has untold value, and that the most profound transformations often begin with a single, compassionate gesture.